Picture this. You're watching CNN on what seems like just another boring Tuesday night, when suddenly, the most legendary takedown in legal television history unfolds right before your eyes. I'm talking about the moment when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself against one of America's most arrogant legal minds. She absolutely dismantled him so thoroughly that he was left speechless on live television. And trust me, what you're about to hear will change everything you think you know about who gets to claim expertise in America. What happened in those next 5 minutes didn't just shock viewers nationwide. It sparked a cultural revolution about credentials, respect, and power that's still rippling through law schools and boardrooms across the country today. By the end of this story, you'll understand why this single exchange became legendary, why a Harvard professor issued his first public apology in decades, and how one woman's brilliant response created a masterclass that's now taught in universities everywhere. So buckle up, because we're diving deep into the night Jasmine Crockett changed American discourse forever. It's a crisp evening in CNN's Atlanta studios, and the air is thick with tension you could practically cut with a knife. The bright studio lights are blazing down on what's supposed to be a civilized legal debate about presidential immunity. On one side of the polished table sits Dershowitz, and let me paint you a picture of this guy. He's 85 years old, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of confidence that comes from 5 decades of being the smartest person in every room he enters. This man has represented everyone from O.J. Simpson to Donald Trump. His books line the shelves of law libraries from Harvard to Yale. When Dershowitz speaks, the legal world listens. Across from him sits Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and the contrast couldn't be more striking. She's 43, wearing a sharp red blazer that stands out against CNN's signature blue backdrop, and there's something about her calm demeanor that suggests she's seen this movie before. What viewers don't know yet, what Dershowitz is about to learn the hard way, is that they're not just watching a political debate. They're about to witness the most spectacular professional reckoning in modern television history. Now, here's what makes this story absolutely incredible. The tension between these two had been building for weeks. This isn't their first rodeo together on CNN's legal panels, and Dershowitz had developed this infuriating habit of dismissing Crockett without even addressing her arguments. He'd interrupt her constantly, refer to her as Congresswoman, instead of acknowledging her legal background, and basically treat her like some small-town politician who'd wandered into a conversation way above her pay grade. For viewers watching at home, this represented something much bigger than just two lawyers disagreeing. This was about the old guard trying to maintain control, and a new generation demanding their rightful seat at the table. And tonight, that simmering tension is about to explode in the most spectacular way imaginable. The host, Michael Santiago, you know him, veteran CNN journalist with that perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of gravitas that makes you trust everything he says, introduces a segment with typical cable news drama. Tonight, we're discussing the Supreme Court's upcoming ruling on presidential immunity, a case with profound implications for our democracy. Standard stuff, right? What none of them realize is that they're about to create television gold. Dershowitz launches into his familiar argument with the confidence of someone who's never had his expertise questioned. The Constitution grants the president unique powers as the chief executive. He begins, straightening his tie like he's about to deliver a lecture to first-year law students. Without broad immunity, a president cannot effectively govern. Every decision will be paralyzed by fear of prosecution from political opponents. Now, watch Crockett here. She's not fidgeting, not preparing some angry comeback. She's just sitting there, taking notes, waiting patiently like a chess master who already sees a checkmate coming in 20 moves. When her turn comes, she responds with surgical precision. While I respect Professor Dershowitz's long career, I must disagree. The Constitution establishes that no one is above the law. Complete immunity would effectively create an American king, exactly what the founders fought against. And this is where you can see Dershowitz's face tighten. He's not used to being challenged so directly, especially not by someone he clearly considers beneath his intellectual level. His response drips with condescension. Congresswoman, with all due respect, you're confusing immunity from prosecution with being above the law. They're legally distinct concepts. This is basic constitutional theory. Basic constitutional theory. Can you believe this guy? He just basically called a sitting congresswoman stupid on national television. But here's the thing, Crockett doesn't take the bait. Her voice stays perfectly even as she replies, "I'm not confused at all, Professor. I'm quite familiar with the distinction. My point is that functional immunity must have limits, particularly for actions taken outside official duties." The host tries to steer the conversation back to substance, but Dershowitz is clearly getting agitated. When asked about his previous arguments that presidents could have immunity for actions that benefit them personally, he doubles down. Of course, if a president believed their reelection is in the national interest, actions taken toward that goal could fall under official duties. Now, this is an absolutely extraordinary legal claim, and Crockett knows it. She shakes her head slightly, not in anger, but almost in disappointment, and says, "That's an extraordinary claim that essentially nullifies accountability. Under that theory, a president could direct the Justice Department to arrest political opponents and claim immunity." And here's where Dershowitz completely loses it. His face flushes red, and he snaps, "That's a ridiculous exaggeration. No serious legal scholar would interpret my position that way." But Crockett is ready. Actually, many serious scholars have criticized exactly that implication in your writing. I can cite several law review articles published in the last year alone. The camera operators in the studio are starting to exchange glances. The producer is speaking urgently into the host's earpiece, probably telling him to go to commercial because this is getting heated. But Santiago ignores the suggestion because he knows he's got compelling television gold unfolding right in front of him. And then Dershowitz makes the mistake that will haunt him for the rest of his career. He turns directly to Crockett, his voice hardening with unmistakable contempt, and says, "Congresswoman, I've taught constitutional law at Harvard for 5 decades. I've argued before the Supreme Court 17 times. With all due respect to your political career, I think I understand the nuances of presidential immunity better than someone who spent a few years as a local attorney." The studio goes dead silent. Even the camera crew stops moving. Everyone in that room knows a line has just been crossed, but nobody, absolutely nobody, is prepared for what happens next. There's this flash across Crockett's face, but it's not anger. It's something much more dangerous. It's the look of someone who's been underestimated their entire career and has finally decided to show their cards. "Professor," she says, her voice carrying a new edge, "my few years include representing clients before the Supreme Court as well. But more importantly, legal expertise isn't measured solely by years at Harvard. Different perspectives strengthen our legal system." Dershowitz actually laughs. It's a short, dismissive sound that makes your skin crawl. Perspective is valuable in politics, Congresswoman. In constitutional law, there's established precedent and theory. It's not a matter of opinion. Law is always evolving, Professor, Crockett responds. That's why we have new precedents, new interpretations. Even the originalists on the court recognize that understanding changes. The tension in that studio is now so thick you could practically see it. The control room has gone completely silent. Everyone knows they're witnessing something unprecedented, but nobody knows exactly what's coming next. Dershowitz leans forward, removes his glasses for dramatic effect, and delivers what he thinks will be the killing blow. "Let me be direct, Congresswoman. You're a politician now, not a practicing attorney. Your role is to represent your constituents, not a lecture on constitutional law, especially not as someone who literally wrote the textbook many law students still use." And that's when everything changes. The host opens his mouth to intervene, but Crockett raises her hand slightly, just a small gesture that somehow commands the entire room. What happens next is the most beautiful, methodical destruction of arrogance you will ever witness. "Professor," she says, her voice measured but carrying a quiet authority that makes everyone lean in, "you keep referencing your Harvard position as if it's the ultimate authority. Many fine legal minds never taught at Harvard, including, I might add, several Supreme Court justices." Dershowitz's face reddens even more. "I'm not claiming Harvard is the only credential that matters. I'm simply stating that decades of specialized experience count for something in this discussion." "They absolutely do," Crockett agrees, and for a second it seems like she might back down. But then she delivers the setup. just as actual courtroom experience counts. When was the last time you personally represented a client in trial court, Professor? The question hangs in the air like a sword. Dershowitz hadn't tried a case at the trial level in years. He'd been focusing on appeals, consulting, and cable news commentary. Before he can even formulate a response, Crockett continues with surgical precision. Experience matters in different ways. My experience representing everyday Americans facing a system stacked against them offers insights you might not have from your position of privilege. And there it is, that word that absolutely triggers something primal in Dershowitz. Privilege. He straightens in his chair, finger pointing accusingly, and says the words that will make him regret this night for the rest of his life. Don't lecture me about privilege, Congresswoman. I earned everything through hard work and scholarship. I wasn't handed anything because of identity politics. The studio goes completely still. The implication in his statement is crystal clear to everyone watching, and it's ugly. The host looks genuinely alarmed because he knows the conversation has veered into dangerous territory that could destroy careers. But Crockett's expression doesn't change. If anything, she looks almost relieved, like Dershowitz has finally confirmed something she suspected all along. Professor Dershowitz, she says, her voice taking on a new edge, are you suggesting my career advances came from identity politics rather than merit? Dershowitz tries to backtrack, but it's too late. I'm saying that in today's political climate, certain backgrounds are elevated regardless of qualifications. That's just reality. Crockett nods slowly, and there's something terrifying about her calm in this moment. I see. And my law degree, my years practicing, my case record, all that is secondary to what you perceive as demographic advantages. Congresswoman, I didn't say that specifically about you, but you implied it, Professor. Let's be clear about what's happening here. You're questioning my legal credentials because I disagree with you. That's not scholarship. That's arrogance. Dershowitz's face flushes deeper. The conversation has completely slipped from his control, and he's scrambling. Your credentials are fine. Where did you get your law degree again? Houston. A fine regional school, I'm sure, but hardly. And that's when Jasmine Crockett reaches for her briefcase. Professor, she says, her voice deadly calm as she opens a folder. I was hoping you'd go there. The studio lights seem to brighten as she pulls out document after document. Her composure is absolutely striking compared to Dershowitz's visible agitation. You've made it clear this isn't about constitutional interpretation for you. It's about credentials, about who has the right to speak on these issues. So let's talk about credentials. She pulls out her first document and lays it deliberately on the table between them. This is my complete legal resume. 15 years practicing law before entering Congress. Over 200 cases tried, 7 appearances before appellate courts, 2 before the Supreme Court, a 92% success rate. Dershowitz glances at the paper but doesn't pick it up, probably thinking he can dismiss this as small-town Texas law. An impressive career in local Texas courts, I'm sure, but we're discussing complex constitutional theory. I'm not finished, Professor, Crockett says, her voice firmer now. She pulls out another document with the precision of a surgeon selecting the perfect scalpel. This is the amicus brief I authored in Martin v. Texas, which the Supreme Court cited directly in their ruling. Justice Kagan called it particularly illuminating on questions of executive authority. You can see Dershowitz shift uncomfortably. He clearly hadn't been aware of her work on that case, and suddenly his confident dismissal is looking less secure. And this, Crockett continues, producing another paper with devastating calm, is a peer-reviewed article I published in the Columbia Law Review on the limits of executive privilege, a topic directly relevant to our discussion tonight. The host, Michael Santiago, leans forward with genuine interest. Congresswoman, I wasn't aware you had published in the Columbia Law Review. Yes, she replies, sliding another document forward like she's playing cards and revealing a royal flush. And the Harvard Law Review as well. This piece from 3 years ago, examining the historical precedents of presidential immunity. Dershowitz stares at the Harvard Law Review article with visible shock. Publishing in his own institution's most prestigious journal is no small achievement, and everyone in that room knows it. But since Professor Dershowitz seems particularly concerned about my education, Crockett continues with the patience of someone who's been saving the best for last. Let me address that directly. She pulls out one final document and places it deliberately in front of Dershowitz. This is my academic record from the University of Houston Law Center, where I graduated summa cum laude in the top 2% of my class. Below that is my score on the Texas bar exam, which was in the top 1% that year. The camera zooms in on Dershowitz's face as he glances at the document, and you can literally watch his expression shift. It's a mixture of surprise and the dawning realization that he has severely, catastrophically underestimated his opponent. And finally, Crockett says, pulling out a folded newspaper clipping with the flourish of someone playing their ace, this is from a Harvard Crimson, dated 2017. It's an article about guest lecturers in constitutional law that semester. You might notice a familiar name among them. The host leans over to look. Is that you, Congresswoman? Yes, she says simply, and the single word lands like a thunderbolt. I was invited by Professor Lawrence Tribe to guest lecture at Harvard Law on civil rights litigation. Professor Dershowitz and I were actually on campus the same week, though we never met. The studio falls completely silent. The revelation that Crockett had lectured at Harvard Law, Dershowitz's own home turf, changes the entire dynamic of not just this conversation, but everything that came before it. It's not just that she has impressive credentials. It's that she has them in the very spaces Dershowitz had used to dismiss her. Dershowitz clears his throat, and for the first time all night he sounds uncertain. I wasn't aware of your guest lecture. Lawrence is a distinguished colleague, though we often disagree. That's exactly the point, Professor, Crockett replies, gathering her documents with the calm of someone who has just delivered a master class. Distinguished legal minds can disagree without questioning each other's fundamental qualifications or right to participate in the conversation. She returns the papers to her folder with deliberate care. I didn't bring these out to brag about my resume. I brought them because you left me no choice but to defend my right to sit at this table as your equal in this discussion. The host, recognizing he's witnessing television history, asks, Professor Dershowitz, would you like to respond? Dershowitz, now visibly uncomfortable and clearly scrambling, attempts to recover. I never suggested Congresswoman Crockett isn't accomplished. I simply emphasize that in constitutional matters, specialized experience. Let me stop you there, Professor, Crockett interrupts, her voice now carrying a quiet authority that commands the entire room. What she says next transforms this from a personal exchange into something much more profound. This isn't just about me. This is about a pattern I've observed throughout my career, and tonight on this show, she turns slightly to address the camera directly, speaking to millions of viewers across America. There are brilliant legal minds across America who didn't attend the most prestigious schools, who didn't teach at Harvard, who didn't represent celebrity clients, and yet their understanding of the law, their contributions to jurisprudence, are no less valuable. She turns back to Dershowitz with the gravity of someone delivering a closing argument. When you dismiss my legal education without knowing anything about my performance there, when you suggested my career advancements came from identity politics rather than merit, you weren't just insulting me. You were revealing a blindness to excellence that doesn't fit your narrow definition. Dershowitz's attempt to interject is stopped by Crockett's raised hand, a gesture that somehow carries more authority than all his decades of Harvard credentials. The law doesn't belong exclusively to Harvard professor. It belongs to all Americans, and its interpretation isn't the sole province of those who walk through certain ivy-covered gates. The control room is completely silent. Producers who have been ready to cut to commercial are now transfixed, knowing they're witnessing something remarkable. This isn't just a political argument anymore. This is a profound moment of accountability that's going to be talked about for years. Dershowitz, a man who controlled every conversation for 50 years, finds himself completely speechless. His usual rhetorical flourishes and appeals to authority have been systematically dismantled, not with anger or matching condescension, but with calm, irrefutable evidence. But here's what makes Crockett's response truly brilliant. Just when you think she's going to deliver the killing blow, she does something unexpected. Her tone softens slightly, and she says, I've admired your work for many years, Professor. Your defense of civil liberties, Your early writings on the First Amendment, these made a significant impact on my own legal thinking, which is why your dismissal of my credentials tonight is so disappointing. The personal note, acknowledging Dershowitz's contributions while holding him accountable for his behavior, strikes a powerful chord. It's not just that she defended herself. She did so with a grace that highlighted the pettiness of his attack while offering him a path back to dignity. The host, sensing the perfect moment to transition, says, "We need to take a quick break, but when we return, I'd like to get back to the actual legal question of presidential immunity, and perhaps we can model a more productive form of disagreement." He looks pointedly at Dershowitz as the camera pulls back for commercial. As the on-air light goes off, Dershowitz sits motionless, staring at the Harvard Crimson article still on the table between them. For perhaps the first time in his long, distinguished career, the famous professor has been rendered completely speechless on national television. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. When they come back from break, viewers notice an immediate, dramatic change in Dershowitz's demeanor. Gone is the dismissive tone, the interruptions, the condescending lectures. Instead, he addresses Crockett as counselor, a term of professional respect among attorneys, and actually engages with her arguments rather than attacking her right to make them. The conversation becomes substantive, with both offering nuanced perspectives on the limits of presidential power. Their disagreements remain, but the nature of the exchange has fundamentally changed. Viewers aren't watching a dismissal anymore. They're watching a debate between equals. As the segment concludes, Dershowitz does something rare for him. He concedes a point. Counselor Crockett raises a valid concern about the potential for abuse under too broad an immunity doctrine. While I still believe presidents need protection to govern effectively, her point about actions clearly outside official duties is well taken. Crockett nods in acknowledgement, and I appreciate Professor Dershowitz's expertise on the historical development of immunity doctrines. There is value in understanding how these concepts evolved, even as we debate their proper limits. The host concludes, "Thank you both. This conversation demonstrates that even the most passionate legal disagreements can ultimately be conducted with mutual respect for expertise and experience." But the real story was just beginning. As the segment ended, social media was already exploding. Within minutes, #CrockettCredentials was trending nationwide. Legal professors were sharing clips with their students. The American Bar Association reposted the exchange with captions about professionalism in the face of disrespect. By morning, mainstream outlets had picked up the story. The Washington Post ran an analysis titled "The Harvard Card: When Credentials Become Weapons." The New York Times featured an op-ed from a prominent black female attorney about similar experiences in legal settings. But perhaps the most surprising response came from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor's office, inviting Crockett to speak at an upcoming judicial conference. "Your handling of that situation exemplified the best traditions of the bar," the justice's clerk told her. For Crockett, the attention was validating, but not the point. In a CBS interview the next morning, she explained, "This wasn't about me or my resume. It was about challenging the assumption that only certain voices deserve to be part of our most important legal conversations." Meanwhile, Dershowitz faced unexpected backlash. Former students and colleagues publicly criticized his behavior. 2 days later, he did something almost unprecedented. He issued a public apology. Upon reflection, my comments to Congresswoman Crockett were inappropriate and failed to acknowledge her significant legal accomplishments. This incident has prompted me to reflect on assumptions I may have carried throughout my career. The exchange sparked broader conversations about credentialism in American professional life. Texas Southern University Law School saw applications spike. CNN launched a new series called Beyond Credentials, exploring unconventional paths to expertise. 6 months later, Dershowitz reached out to Crockett with an unexpected proposal: co-teaching an online course on constitutional interpretation. Our disagreement, however uncomfortable in the moment, highlighted the value of diverse viewpoints in constitutional analysis, he wrote. Crockett agreed, with one condition: the course would be freely available to law students from all backgrounds, not just elite institutions. Their first session drew over 10,000 virtual attendees from law schools across America. In legal circles, The Dershowitz Crockett moment became shorthand for a turning point when challenging someone's right to participate became less acceptable than engaging with their actual arguments. And for Jasmine Crockett, the incident reinforced a truth she'd always believed. Excellence in law takes many forms and follows many paths. Her willingness to stand her ground that night didn't just offend her own credentials. It created space for countless others whose expertise had been similarly dismissed. As one first-year law student from a small state school wrote to her, "Watching you that night showed me I don't need to apologize for my path. My understanding of law isn't determined by my school's prestige, but by the depth of my study and the integrity of my practice." This, more than any viral clip or trending hashtag, was a true impact of that electric moment when Jasmine Crockett transformed an insult into an opportunity to challenge who gets to claim expertise in America's most important conversations. That single exchange didn't just change how these two legal minds interacted. It sparked a national conversation about respect, credentials, and the true meaning of expertise that continues to this day. Because sometimes the most powerful response to dismissal isn't anger. It's simply proving them wrong with undeniable evidence and unshakable grace. And that, my friends, is how you turn a moment of disrespect into a masterclass that gets taught in law schools for generations to come.